Elizabeth, thank you. Wisconsin Republican lawmakers are proposing a new nonpartisan redistricting plan modeled after the state of Iowa.
Now, the move comes as the Wisconsin Supreme Court is set to consider two Democratic-backed lawsuits seeking to toss the Republican maps. Now, a reminder, going back in time, the current maps were first enacted in 2011 and then redrawn last year. Highly contentious, lengthy process. Now, we received statements from lawmakers today. Republican State Representative Travis Tranel of Cuba City said, quote, "We have long supported a nonpartisan redistricting approach," adding, "We have seen how well this model has worked in the state of Iowa and feel it could be equally effective here in Wisconsin." Democratic Senator Melissa Agard says, quote, "Let me be clear. Republicans have done nothing to honor the will of the voters when it comes to nonpartisan redistricting. We cannot trust that cheaters will start playing fair now." Now, the system would be modeled after the state of Iowa's process to redraw districts. Governor Evers would have to sign the bill in order to move forward with new maps and preempt the state Supreme Court from weighing in. Evers says Republicans are, quote, "making a last-ditch effort," and that is, quote, "bogus."